But my first guest is not entirely in disagreement with them, saying that there's a good argument for seeing a little bit of weakness for the yuan, the Chinese currency, next year. We're joined by Simon Derrick. Simon is Chief Currency Strategist at Bank of New York Mellon. You heard those comments. What did you make of them, Simon?
Well, I've got to say, I do agree with what Mr. Farber's saying. I mean, interest rates aren't the only solution here. There are deeper problems within the Chinese economy, but at the moment, they're going to do whatever it takes to be able to get the economy back on track. And if that means putting interest rates down towards zero, ultimately, yes, absolutely. But I think the reason why I think in particular the currency side is an important one here is that it is still an export-led economy. And one of the effects of the currency movements over the last 3 or 4 months is to take the Chinese yuan from being one of the weakest currencies in the world to one of the strongest currencies in the world as it's followed the dollar up. That's pretty well the very last thing they need as an export-led economy, an export-led economy which is struggling increasingly as global demand collapses. So I think there is a very good chance that they could start to push the yuan down next year.
But what's the mechanism? How would that work?
I think that what they do, I mean, you've got to remember that they literally peg on a day-for-day basis. The central bank sets the central rate, and then it moves around that particular target. So the central bank simply sets the rate. There is already some evidence, though, if we look back to October, there's already some evidence of real outflows starting to emerge from China. They had the first decline in their foreign exchange reserves since December 2003.
Yeah, but we're talking about $1 trillion worth, haven't we?
Absolutely. Only 16 billion, so that's less than 1% of their foreign exchange reserves. But nevertheless, that's a true exception. It's only the second time this decade that that's happened. That shows that there is a shift in thinking taking place there. And therefore, if they were to start guiding that currency down, I don't think that they find the markets particularly against them.
Right, but would that help? Would it be enough to sort of, I guess, get the exports out there again, make their goods even cheaper once more, or do you think the world economy is just going to be too weak to absorb it?
I think the world economy is going to be too weak to absorb it, and they do have very real problems. If you listen to what was being said over the weekend, they were talking about the issue of migrant workers. They're desperate to get these people back and back into work, but it's very clear that they're very concerned about the possibility of social unrest building up.
Into companies. Well, we're back with Simon Derrick. He's Chief Currency Strategist at Bank New York Mellon Corporation. Right, I had a guest saying that euro is going to rise further against sterling and indeed also against perhaps the dollar, but it's on a picnic. Discuss.
Well, yes, it will some be short of a picnic, possibly. I do think the euro is going to go higher, and I do think this is a monetary policy story rather than anything else. It's very clear that there is a radically different view of the world taking place within at least some members of the ECB than the discussions taking place at the Bank of England or at the Federal Reserve. You know, here in the UK, we're talking about when we're going to get rates below 1% and whether we're going to go for quantitative easing or some kind of policy.
Well, we are
like
anyway,
that.
aren't we?
Well,
all but name.
All but name. Yeah.
That stimulus package, for instance.
And I think that we're just going to make that rather more clear, no more than that. Whereas in within the ECB, we're still talking about whether should we have another rate cut from here. You know, we're still talking about this idea that the rate cuts that have already gone through are going to be sufficient to hit the price target next year.
Yeah,
well,
but look at that. That's the euro against sterling. I mean, 105, 106 basically. Do we hit parity?
Yes. Yeah.
Then what happens? And when do we hit parity?
I think we hit parity relatively quickly because the story is going to become even more clear as we get into January and February. So I don't think there's any issues about that. I think the issues are when people within the Eurozone start to complain about the impact that the ECB's policy is having on some of the countries like Greece and Italy and Spain and Ireland, where they started to see these really heavy falls within the housing markets where the economies are really starting to suffer fairly badly.
Yeah, but
and where they're looking across the water and they're looking at the UK and saying, that looks a really rather attractive alternative.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, devaluation has been always a key to Britain actually bouncing back at some stage or the other, but it doesn't necessarily make the underlying British economy stronger.
I think if we look back to what happened in 1992, 1993, 1994, the move back to a free floating exchange rate was the very thing that gave the UK economy the ability to be able to recover. This is why you have free floating exchange rates in the first place. So you have that flexibility that when things do go bad, you do move to a more competitive level on the currency. I think that's absolutely right and proper. The problem is if you're Spain or you're Ireland, you don't have that flexibility anymore, and not even on the exchange rate, but on monetary policy either. I think there's going to be a lot of complaints within Europe about what's going on.
What I'm driving at, Simon, is, I mean, traditionally we look at a strong currency being one of the fundamentals of what the Bundesbank used to do when we had the mark, right? And that used to constantly keep the mark strong and appreciating against a basket of currencies. Now, will that work for the Eurozone as a whole, though? Will it work for the German economy?
Well, I'm not even that certain it was ever that great for the German economy. This is rather more about fears of what happened 60, 70, 80 years ago. That's always been the underlying issue. That's what drove the Bundesbank, and it's secretly what drives the core of the ECB today. Is it the right thing? Is it the proper thing? Will it ultimately be bad news for the Eurozone? I think it will be bad news for the Eurozone. So do I think that the euro keeps going up indefinitely? No, I don't. I think there will come a point where those tensions within the Eurozone start to impact on investor sentiment. And you can already see it. You can already see it when you look at what's happening on European government bond spreads. When you see Greek government, 10-year government bonds trading at over 200 basis points above their equivalent German paper, or Italian government bond paper going towards 150 basis points. It's clear those tensions are building. A high euro's only going to exacerbate those tensions.
Simon, have a fantastic Christmas.
Thank you, Resh. You too.
And we'll have Simon in the new year, I'm sure, as well. Simon Derrick there from Bank of New York Mellon. Right, coming